I was forbidden to celebrate my 18th birthday since my sister didn't feel special enough. I left home that night. A year later, their golden girl realized how well I was doing, and her envious outburst broke the family. My parents wouldn't let me celebrate my 18th birthday because my sister said she didn't feel special enough, so I packed up and left that very night. A year later, watching their favorite child lose it out of pure jealousy after seeing how well I was doing ended up cracking the whole family apart. I can still picture the exact second it finally clicked just how little I meant to my parents. It was about 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, and I'd just gotten home from my after-school shift at the bookstore, feeling excited and hopeful as I talked about maybe having a small dinner with a few friends. I wasn't asking for anything big, just something simple to acknowledge the milestone. My mom was in the kitchen with my younger sister Lily, who was 16 then, and they were flipping through party decoration catalogs, which felt promising until I realized they weren't for me at all. They were planning a redo of Lily's Sweet 16 from 4 months earlier because, according to her, the first one didn't fully express who she really was. And no, I'm not exaggerating. I said, "Mom, I wanted to ask about my birthday next month," as I set my backpack down by the counter, and the look she shot me could have stopped time. She told me, "Ryan, your sister is dealing with a lot right now, and she's been feeling ignored, so we need to focus on her and be careful with her feelings." Lily never even glanced up, just kept circling balloon arches and dessert tables with a pink gel pen like I wasn't there. I said slowly that I only wanted dinner with maybe 5 friends and suggested that Italian place downtown, explaining I'd saved the money myself. My dad's voice cut in from the doorway with a sharp "absolutely not," and I hadn't even noticed him walk in. He asked if I had any idea how that would make my sister feel, saying she was already fragile and watching me celebrate would crush her. I stared at him and reminded him it was my 18th birthday, but my mom snapped back that Lily was my sister and family always came first, like we discussed before. She said turning 18 meant becoming an adult, which apparently meant thinking less about myself and more about how everything I did affected other people. The logic was so backwards I almost laughed, but I stopped myself. Lily finally looked up with wide, innocent eyes and said she was sorry and knew it wasn't fair, but she felt like no one ever noticed her, and if I celebrated, she'd feel invisible again. My mom immediately pulled her close and praised her for being so emotionally aware and mature, which told me everything I needed to know. I walked out of the kitchen without saying another word. That night, lying in bed, I started doing the math. I had $3,847 saved from 2 years of working at the bookstore, money meant for college, and on top of that I'd earned a full academic scholarship to State University that covered tuition and housing. My birthday fell on a Friday, and I'd turn 18 at exactly 6:23 in the morning, the time my mom loved reminding me she'd gone into labor. By midnight I had my plan. Over the next 3 weeks I became an expert at pretending everything was normal. I went to school, worked my shifts, came home, did my homework, and never brought up my birthday again, and my parents seemed relieved by the silence. Lily went right back to planning her party redo, which somehow turned into a weekend spa resort trip that cost more than my car, and my car was only worth about $800 with a muffler held together by wire hangers, but still. The Thursday before my birthday I started quietly moving my things out, starting with smaller stuff like my laptop, important papers, and favorite books. I'd rented a storage unit across town for $39 a month and made trips after work, telling my parents I'd picked up extra shifts. My best friend Marcus knew what I was doing and even offered to let me stay with his family, but I turned it down because I needed to prove to myself I could do this on my own. Friday morning I woke up at 6, and at 6:23 I lay there in the quiet of my childhood room and whispered happy birthday to myself. No one came in, there was no surprise, no cake, no card waiting for me. I got dressed, packed the last of what I needed into 2 duffel bags, and headed downstairs where my parents were drinking coffee and Lily was still asleep. I told them I was leaving, and my mom barely looked up before saying okay and wishing me a good day at school. I clarified that I meant I was leaving for good, moving out because I was 18 and done. My dad froze mid-sip and asked what I was talking about, and I explained I'd already packed, found a room near campus, and was starting my summer job on Monday. My mom cycled through a few expressions before settling on anger, and accused me of being ridiculous and throwing a tantrum over a birthday. I told her calmly that this wasn't a tantrum, it was a decision, and that they'd already shown me where I stood in the family, which I'd accepted, but I didn't need to stay and keep watching it. My dad stood up, face red, and warned me that if I walked out that door, I shouldn't expect to be welcomed back, and I told him I didn't expect anything from them anymore, which honestly felt like a relief. My mom softened her tone and said I was upset and suggested we talk it through and maybe do something small for my birthday that weekend, but I told her I didn't want something small later. I wanted to matter 3 weeks ago when I asked, or years ago, or at literally any point before that morning. I picked up my bags and said I'd come back for the rest of my stuff when they weren't home. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, confused and half asleep, and my mom bitterly told her I was being selfish and throwing away my family over a birthday party. I looked at Lily and felt a brief flash of pity because she'd been raised to believe everything revolved around her feelings, and that would hurt her someday, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix. I told her goodbye and walked out. The room I rented belonged to an older woman named Mrs. Parker, who owned a house and rented rooms to college students. The place was tiny, not much bigger than a walk-in closet, but it belonged to me and that alone made it feel huge. Inside I had a twin bed, a small desk, a dresser, and a window that faced a little garden out back. Rent was $425 a month with utilities included, which felt like a miracle. That first night, I sat on my bed eating Chinese takeout by myself, surrounded by boxes. Around 8, Mrs. Parker knocked and handed me a cupcake with one candle stuck in the middle. Smiling gently as she said my rental paperwork mentioned that today was my birthday, and everyone deserved cake on their birthday. That was the moment I broke down and cried for the first time since I'd walked out of my parents' house. The months that followed were tough in ways I hadn't fully prepared for. Juggling 30 hours a week at work while taking summer classes wore me down fast. Most days I lived on ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free food I could snag from campus events. There was no money for extras at all, no coffee runs, no movies, no new clothes, but despite that I felt lighter than I had in years. My parents called twice during the first month, and both conversations were short, awkward, and ended with them pushing me to apologize and move back home, which I refused to do. After that, the calls stopped completely. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard they told extended family I'd simply chosen to live independently instead of admitting we'd had a falling out. Lily texted me once saying Mom and Dad were really hurt, and that I should apologize, and I blocked her number without responding. I threw myself into school and work with a level of intensity that probably wasn't great for me. I overloaded my class schedule, picked up freelance graphic design gigs, and by the end of summer, I landed an internship at a marketing firm downtown. It was supposed to be unpaid, but my supervisor, Grace Holloway, was so impressed by my work that she pushed the company to start paying me $15 an hour. After I redesigned an entire client social media strategy, she looked at me and said I had a real eye for this, then asked how old I was. When I told her I was 18, she laughed and said she hadn't had half her life figured out at 30. Working at Holloway and Associates challenged me in a way that felt healthy instead of draining. Grace knew how to push me just past my comfort zone without ever making me feel dumb. She'd hand me projects that felt impossible, then give just enough direction for me to figure them out on my own. My first big assignment was rebranding a local coffee chain that was losing customers to corporate competition. I spent 2 weeks researching their customers, digging into their social media numbers, and building a plan that focused on their community roots and artsy vibe. When I presented everything to Grace and the client, my hands were shaking so badly I had to lock them behind my back, but the client loved it. They used every suggestion I made, and within 6 weeks their foot traffic jumped by 30%. The day the numbers came in, Grace called me into her office and told me I'd just secured the company a long-term contract, then slid an envelope across her desk and said it was a bonus. Inside was $500 more cash than I'd ever held at once, and all I could manage was a quiet thank you. She told me not to thank her because I'd earned it, then sent me back to work because she had more clients who needed me. I put the money straight into savings, but the real reward was knowing someone saw value in what I did beyond just showing up. By October, Grace offered me a part-time position through the school year at $22 an hour, which felt unreal, and I accepted on the spot before going home and crying in my tiny room because things were finally starting to work out. The job forced me to completely rearrange my schedule, so I took morning classes and worked afternoons and evenings at the firm. My weeks blurred into lectures, client meetings, design work, and late-night studying, fueled by coffee and stubborn determination, with maybe 5 hours of sleep on a good night. Mrs. Parker noticed how worn down I was and started leaving containers of homemade soup outside my door with notes reminding me to eat something other than noodles and telling me I looked too thin. Those small acts of kindness carried me through days when I felt close to collapsing. Every so often, I wondered if leaving home had been a mistake, not because I missed my parents, but because I was exhausted and couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for fun. Then I'd walk past my old house on the way to campus and see Lily's car in the driveway with the custom license plate my parents bought her. And I'd remember exactly why I left. In November, I ran into one of Lily's friends at a campus coffee shop. Ashley Winters had practically lived at our house in high school and recognized me instantly, calling my name and hugging me before I could step back. She said my mom told her I'd moved out for school and how cool it was that I was living independently, so clearly that was the clean version of the story they were telling. I told her I was doing fine and kept my voice neutral while she said Lily missed me and talked about me all the time and wished I'd come home for Thanksgiving. I told her I already had plans, and her smile slipped a little as she said Lily would be sad to hear that. She went on to explain that my parents were throwing Lily a huge Thanksgiving celebration at some fancy restaurant on 5th Street, and that the whole family would be there. Of course they were. Another big event centered around Lily, another chance to spoil her while pretending I didn't exist. I said it sounded nice, and Ashley suggested I should come because they probably loved to see me, but I told her I doubted that and said I needed to go. I left before she could say anything else, my chest tight with old anger I thought I'd already worked through. The encounter stuck with me for days as I kept picturing my family gathered around some over-the-top Thanksgiving table, laughing and happy, without a single person wondering where I was or if I was okay. Marcus picked up on the shift in my mood pretty quickly. We'd been together about a month at that point, and I tried not to unload all my family baggage on him too fast, but after we studied late one night at the library, he finally asked me straight up what was going on and said I'd seemed distant all week. So I told him everything about my parents, about Lily, and about the birthday that finally broke whatever was left between us. He listened without cutting me off, and the more I talked, the darker his expression got. When I finished, he shook his head and said it was seriously messed up, like on a whole different level. I shrugged and said it was just how things were, but he pushed back immediately and told me it wasn't normal at all and that parents weren't supposed to play favorites like that. I said I knew, but he looked at me and asked if I really did because I was talking about it like it was some odd family habit instead of what it actually was, which was emotional neglect. Hearing him say it, that plainly cracked something open in me, and I admitted I'd never thought about it that way, and had always assumed I just wasn't trying hard enough to be what they wanted. He told me that was exactly how people who grow up neglected tend to think and said none of it had ever been my fault. We sat in his car in the library parking lot while I cried harder than I had in months, and he just held my hand and let me feel it without trying to fix me. After I finally calmed down, he told me I was coming to Ohio with him for Thanksgiving and said his mom would feed me until I couldn't move and his dad would talk my ear off about his model train collection, and that it wasn't up for debate. I said I didn't want to intrude, but he told me I wasn't intruding and that I was family now, explaining that functional families actually wanted to include people. Going to Ohio for Thanksgiving turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd made in a long time. Marcus's parents, Robert and Linda, treated me like I'd always been part of their world. Linda showed me how to make her grandmother's sweet potato casserole, and Robert proudly walked me through his elaborate model train setup in the basement, explaining the history behind every tiny detail with real excitement. While we were doing dishes after dinner, Linda told me their son really liked me and talked about me constantly, mentioning my work ethic, kindness, and strength, and I felt my face heat up when I said he was pretty great too. She mentioned that Marcus had shared a little about my family situation and hoped I didn't mind, and I stiffened until she gently told me I was always welcome in their home for holidays, random weekends, or whenever. She rested a hand on my shoulder and said every young person deserved adults who had their back, and if my parents couldn't be that, they would. I had to step away to the bathroom so I could cry where no one could see, because these people barely knew me and were offering more support than my own family ever had. By December, I'd been promoted to junior designer, making enough money to move into a better apartment and buy groceries without checking my balance first. The new place was a one-bedroom in a safer area, with real insulation and a kitchen where more than 2 burners worked, and it honestly made me feel rich. I made the dean's list my first semester, joined a campus design collective, and kept dating Marcus from my economics class, who made me laugh and never made me feel like I had to shrink myself. I built a life that actually felt like mine. Around Thanksgiving, Kiera asked if I was going home for the holidays, and I told her simply that it wasn't my home anymore, and she didn't question it. I spent Thanksgiving with Mrs. Parker and her family, Christmas in Ohio with Marcus's parents, and New Year's Eve at a rooftop party with my design friends, watching fireworks and finally feeling like I understood who I was becoming. My 19th birthday passed quietly but happily, with Marcus taking me out to dinner, my friends surprising me with a party, and Grace giving me a bonus while telling me I was on track to be a senior designer by graduation. Everything was good, better than I ever expected, until March rolled around. I was at a downtown networking event, the kind that used to intimidate me but now felt manageable, and I just finished talking with a potential client when I heard a familiar voice say my name. I turned around and saw Lily. She looked older, sure, but also worn down, with her hair in a messy ponytail, jeans, and a State University sweatshirt, holding a plate of sad-looking cheese cubes. I greeted her neutrally, and she said she almost didn't recognize me while looking me over, since I was in a blazer and heels and carrying the leather portfolio Grace had given me for Christmas, and told me I looked really professional. I explained I was there for work and that I was with Holloway and Associates, and her eyes widened as she repeated the name of the firm and asked if it was that big marketing company downtown. I clarified it was mid-sized and told her I worked part-time as a junior designer, and something unreadable flickered across her face as she said that was great. After a long, awkward pause, I asked if she was there for school, mostly out of politeness, and she said she was a freshman at State and only there because her communications professor required it for extra credit, laughing as she admitted she was kind of failing his class, though the laugh sounded forced. She said college was way harder than she'd expected, and when she asked how I'd managed to leave and figure everything out, the question sounded almost desperate. She said Mom and Dad had assumed I'd come crawling back within a month, but instead I was standing there looking like I had everything together while she was eating free cheese because she couldn't afford dinner. I felt a tight twist in my chest that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite satisfaction, and I told her I'd worked really hard and hadn't had much of a choice. When she asked if it was because of the birthday thing, my jaw tightened and I told her it wasn't just a thing but the last straw in a long pattern. She looked down at her plate and quietly said she knew they hadn't always been fair to me, then admitted she was finally starting to understand it now. College has been absolutely wrecking me, she said quietly, and when I call home freaking out about exams or deadlines, Mom tells me I'm being dramatic and Dad says I just need to toughen up. She let out a short laugh and said it felt like now that she wasn't their special little girl living at home, they suddenly cared a lot less. I realized I should have felt some kind of vindication hearing that, but instead all I felt was this empty, hollow ache. I told her I was sorry she was dealing with that and I meant it, but also said I needed to get back to networking. She stopped me and asked if we could maybe get coffee sometime because she really wanted to talk more and said she missed me. I told her honestly that I didn't think that was a good idea, and she immediately pleaded, saying she knew she'd been awful, knew she'd taken advantage of how our parents treated me, and swore she was trying to be better. I really looked at her then, not just glanced, and she did seem sincere, but I'd been hurt too many times to trust that easily. I finally told her to give me her number and said I'd think about it, and she pulled out her phone so fast it was almost comical. We exchanged numbers, and as soon as she walked away, I felt torn up about the decision and didn't text her. 2 weeks later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and even though I knew better, I answered it. The woman on the line asked if this was Emma Crawford, and when I said yes, she introduced herself as Patricia Winters, Lily's academic advisor at State University, explaining that Lily had listed me as an emergency contact. My stomach dropped as I asked if Lily was okay, and she said she was physically fine but in serious academic trouble. She told me Lily was at risk of failing 3 out of 5 classes and had missed multiple advising appointments, and when she finally came in that day, she broke down crying and said the only person who might understand was her sister. I closed my eyes and admitted I didn't know how I could help, and the advisor explained that Lily thought I might be able to talk to our parents on her behalf because of some family dynamic she didn't fully understand, but that Lily was in crisis and needed support systems. Family support systems, which almost made me laugh from the irony. After a long pause, I told her to let Lily know I'd meet her for coffee the next day. When we met at a cafe near campus, Lily looked worse than she had at the networking event, with dark circles under her eyes, chipped nail polish, and the same worn sweatshirt. She thanked me for coming and said her advisor had called me because she was worried, then admitted she was drowning and didn't know what to do as her voice cracked. She told me that growing up, Everything had always been easy because mom and dad fixed every problem. Talked to teachers when her grades slipped, made excuses when she didn't make teams, and constantly told her she was special and perfect. Then she said she got to college and none of that mattered anymore. And now she was just another student falling behind with no idea how to fix it alone. I asked why she was telling me all this, and she said it was because I'd figured it out and learned how to survive without them, and she needed to know how. I took a breath and told her the truth, that I figured it out because I had no choice, no safety net, that I worked 2 jobs while carrying a full course load, lived on ramen for months, and cried myself to sleep more times than I could count. I told her it wasn't some inspirational journey, it was survival. And when she said she wanted to survive too but didn't know where to start, we talked for 2 full hours. I helped her build a plan with tutoring, office hours, a new study schedule, and dropping 1 class to ease the load, and I gave her my old academic advisor's number from freshman year. As we were leaving, she asked what about mom and dad and whether she should tell them how bad things really were, then answered her own question by admitting they'd probably just say she was too sensitive or not trying hard enough. I told her then she already had her answer. After that, something shifted between us and we started meeting for coffee every week while I helped her with time management and studying, and her grades slowly improved. We avoided talking about our parents or the past, which worked just fine for me. That spring brought new challenges at work, with Grace giving me more complex projects and bringing me into client meetings as an equal instead of an observer, and I learned how to read rooms, pitch confidently, and take criticism without internalizing it. One especially brutal client, a real estate developer named Richard Bronson, shot down every idea I presented for 3 straight weeks, and after another rough meeting I asked Grace why he hated everything I did. She told me he didn't hate my work, he hated that I was young, talented, and intimidating to him, and told me to keep pushing until he saw what she saw. The next week I showed up with a presentation that anticipated every objection he'd raised, backed by research, competitor analysis, and projected returns so detailed he couldn't poke holes in it. After a long silence, he finally agreed to move forward, and once he left, Grace high-fived me and told me that's how you deal with difficult clients, by outworking their bad attitude. The win felt incredible, but it also hit me how much I'd changed in less than a year. From a kid who couldn't stand up for herself to someone who could hold her own professionally against people twice her age. In April, my scholarship advisor called me in for what I assumed was a routine meeting until I sat down and saw her face, and she told me I'd been selected for the presidential scholarship for the following year. A full ride plus a living stipend. I just stared at her as she explained that my GPA, portfolio, and recommendation letters were exceptional, and that I was one of only 5 students chosen across the entire university. The stipend came out to $12,000 for the year, and when I added that to what I was already making at Holloway & Associates, I realized I'd be financially stable for the first time in my life. I wouldn't have to panic about rent anymore or choose between buying textbooks and eating real meals. I thanked her, my voice thick and unsteady, telling her how grateful I was, and she smiled and said I'd earned every bit of it. As soon as I left her office, I called Marcus, and he answered on the second ring. I blurted out that I'd gotten the presidential scholarship, and after a stunned pause, he told me that was amazing and said he was coming to get me because we were celebrating. He took me to the Italian restaurant I'd wanted to go to for my 18th birthday, and neither of us missed the irony. He raised his glass of sparkling cider and toasted to the girl who saved herself, and I raised mine back and said to not giving up, and when we clinked glasses, I felt something finally settle deep inside me. I knew then that I wasn't just going to be okay, I was going to do better than okay, I was going to thrive. Somehow the scholarship news made its way back to my parents, and I still don't know who told them, maybe Ashley or someone else from high school. In early May, my mom called from a number I didn't recognize and told me she'd heard about the scholarship and that it was wonderful news, her voice tight and clearly forced. I thanked her cautiously, and she said they'd love to take me out to celebrate, a family dinner like we used to do, which was such a rewrite of history it almost took my breath away. We had never done family dinners to celebrate my accomplishments, those had always been reserved for Lily, whether the achievement was real or not. I told her I didn't think that was a good idea, and she pleaded, saying it had been almost a year and asking if it wasn't time to move past this. I asked her what exactly she wanted to move past, pointing out that they'd never apologized or even acknowledged what they'd done, and that they just wanted to pretend nothing happened. She said they'd been doing their best as parents and made choices they thought were right at the time, and asked if I couldn't at least give them credit for trying. I told her no, that I couldn't, because trying would have meant listening when I told them how their choices affected me and treating both their daughters with equal care. And instead they'd made a choice. She was quiet for a long moment before saying my sister missed me, and I told her Lily could call me herself, then said goodbye and blocked the number. 2 days later Lily did call, but not in the way I expected. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, and when I asked what was wrong, she told me she'd messed up badly and admitted she'd been arrested the night before. She rushed to explain that no one was hurt, but she'd blown a 09 and gone to jail, and Mom and Dad had to come get her, and now they were disappointed and she didn't know what to do. My stomach dropped as I asked if she was okay, and she said she was scared but fine and that her court date was in 3 weeks. She said our parents were framing it as stress from school, like it wasn't really her fault, but then she said something that stopped me cold, telling me it was her fault, that she chose to drink and drive and could have killed someone. This wasn't excuses or deflection. This was real accountability. I asked her what she needed from me, and she said she didn't know and just needed to hear my voice. She told me Mom and Dad wanted to hire an expensive lawyer to make it all go away, and that she kept thinking about how I'd had to figure everything out alone while she was still letting them fix her problems. I told her she absolutely needed a lawyer because this was serious, and she said she knew but didn't want it to disappear, that she wanted to face the consequences and actually learn something for once instead of having it swept away like everything else. We talked for over an hour, and I helped her think through what taking responsibility really looked like and how to handle the situation with maturity, and by the end of the call she sounded steadier. She asked if we could meet in person for coffee that weekend, and when we did, she seemed different, calmer, and more grounded. She told me she'd insisted on taking a plea deal over our parents' objections, accepting community service and mandatory alcohol education classes, and said Mom and Dad were furious and thought she was ruining her future by not fighting the charges. She said she believed the real damage would have been not learning from it, and I told her I was proud of her and meant it, explaining that it took real courage to face consequences instead of letting someone else clean up your mess. She said she was starting to understand why I left and how our parents had made her weak by never letting her struggle, and we talked about her classes, the volunteer work she'd started at a crisis center, and how she was trying to rebuild her life on her own terms. Watching her change felt like watching someone finally wake up after a long sleep. Then June hit and everything blew up. I was at my apartment when my phone rang and it was my mom, and even though I almost ignored it, curiosity got the better of me. She opened by saying we needed to talk about my sister, skipping any greeting, and told me Lily had admitted she'd been meeting with me regularly, and that I'd been helping her with school. I told her Lily had asked for help and I'd given it, and my mom said Lily had been saying concerning things, like feeling coddled and wishing she'd been raised more like me. I almost laughed, and my mom snapped that this was concerning because I was putting ideas in her head and poisoning her against them out of bitterness over what she called my birthday situation. The laugh finally escaped as I repeated the phrase back to her, asking if that's really what we were calling it now, and told her she was twisting things. They said they'd been trying to be fair to both of their daughters, and I told them flat out that no, they weren't, that they had catered to one child while sacrificing the other, and that those two things were not the same. My mom snapped, asking how dare I say that, and I cut her off, telling her I wasn't doing this anymore. I said I helped Lily because she asked for help, not because I had some vendetta against them, and that if she was questioning their parenting, maybe they should look at themselves instead of blaming me. She shot back that I'd always been ungrateful and blind to their favoritism, and I ended the call without another word. About an hour later, Lily called sounding completely drained and told me Mom and Dad were freaking out and accusing me of turning her against them. When she asked if they were wrong, she admitted she honestly didn't know anymore. She said they wanted all of us to have a family dinner to clear the air and move forward, and every instinct in my body told me no. I said I wasn't interested, but she begged me, saying she needed me there because she couldn't face them alone and had things she needed to say. I told her I didn't think it was a good idea, but she said she was going to speak her truth either way and it would be easier if I was there, so against my better judgment I agreed. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant downtown, and I showed up 15 minutes late on purpose, finding them already seated. My parents looked older than I remembered, my dad noticeably grayer and my mom with deeper lines around her mouth, while Lily looked absolutely terrified. My father thanked me stiffly for coming, and I told them to just get to the point and ask what this was really about. My mom folded her hands and said the family had been fractured for over a year, and it was time to heal, adding that they were willing to move past my birthday tantrum if I apologized and acknowledged my role in the conflict. I stared at her and repeated my part, incredulous, while she accused me of leaving without giving them a chance to explain, cutting off contact, and refusing to come home for holidays, calling those choices I'd made. I told her flatly that those choices came after they decided my sister's feelings mattered more than my entire existence. She said they'd only been trying to be sensitive to Lily's needs, and I asked if that meant forbidding me from celebrating becoming an adult. That's when Lily spoke up, her voice shaking, telling us all to stop talking about her like she wasn't there, and said this dinner was happening because she had things she needed to say. My mom reached for her hand, but Lily pulled away and said Emma had been right about everything, that they had favored her, coddled her, and made me feel invisible so she could feel special, and that it was wrong. My dad tried to shut it down, accusing me of twisting things, but Lily cut him off, saying she was old enough now to see the truth, explaining how my achievements were always minimized while her failures were excused. She reminded them of the second Sweet 16 they threw for her, and how they wouldn't even allow me a simple dinner for my 18th birthday, asking how that could possibly be fair. My mom defended herself by saying Lily had been going through a hard time, and Lily snapped back that she'd been acting like a brat, and they'd enabled it instead of parenting her. She admitted how unprepared she'd been for college and real life, nearly failing her first year because she had no idea how to function without them fixing everything. My dad insisted they were protecting her, and Lily shot back asking from what reality growing up, pointing out that I learned how to survive only because I had no other choice. Then she turned to me, crying, and apologized for being part of the reason I had to leave, for being spoiled, self-centered, and not standing up for me, and my throat tightened as I thanked her. My mom looked at both of us like she was seeing something ugly and said she couldn't believe what she was hearing after everything they'd done for Lily, the opportunities and sacrifices, and I quietly asked if she meant the one she gave to Lily while giving me nothing. She snapped that I'd done just fine on my own with my job and apartment and perfect life, saying maybe they knew I was strong enough to handle things alone, and I told her that wasn't parenting, that was abandonment dressed up as something else. Lily backed me up, saying that was exactly what it was, that they'd abandoned me emotionally long before I left physically, and now they were angry because I succeeded anyway and she was finally seeing them clearly. My dad stood up furious, saying he didn't have to listen to this disrespect, and I calmly told him he was free to leave. When I didn't back down, he threw his napkin down and stormed out, and my mom hesitated before warning Lily that siding with me would hurt her in the long run. Lily told her the real mistake was taking so long to see the truth, and my mom followed my dad out. Lily and I sat quietly for a moment before she said it went about as well as expected, and when I asked if she was okay, she said no, but that she would be. We ordered dinner for just the two of us and talked about everything except our parents, her new relationship, switching her major to psychology, her volunteer work at a teen crisis center, my promotion, Marcus proposing the week before, and the idea of starting my own design firm someday. She was genuinely happy for me and asked if I'd invite our parents to the wedding, and after thinking it over, I said probably not, which she understood. Later, standing outside in the warm night air, she asked what happened next, and I told her we'd figure it out as we went. When she asked if we could keep meeting for coffee, I said I'd like that, and we hugged, both of us feeling like something long broken might finally be mending. 3 months later, my mom texted me asking to talk, and after showing Marcus, who asked what I wanted to do, I deleted the message and said nothing. I texted Lily instead to ask about coffee, and she replied instantly. My 19th birthday had been everything my 18th wasn't, and my 20th was even better, surrounded by Marcus, Lily, Kiera, and friends who truly saw me, with Grace giving a toast and Marcus kissing me under string lights while Lily hugged me and wished me happy birthday. Sitting on the balcony later watching the city glow, I thought about the person I'd been 2 years earlier, walking out with no safety net, only determination and spite, and when Marcus asked if I was okay, I told him I really was. When my mom texted again about reconciling if I was ready to be mature, I blocked the number and turned off my phone, knowing that while you're born into some families, others you build yourself, and the one I'd built was enough.